Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Ask CROs, the show where CROs answer questions sent in by RevOps professionals. So my name is Nico Gillard, co-founder of Medialab, and the reason why I started this show is because there are multiple solutions to every problem, and I think too much of the advice out there is one size fits all. A CRO running a $200 million organization and a seasoned CRO consulting a PE portfolio company are going to give you different answers to the same questions. And both of them are right, which makes this very interesting. So now onto our speakers for today. First, we have Grainne Maycock, CRO at Acolad Group. She leads global revenue with upwards of 200 meals with 150 plus sellers across 3 continents. Amongst other things, Grainne led the integration of 10 acquisitions into a single go-to-market motion and a unified tech stack. Second, we have JD Miller. JD is the multiple-time CROs who's gone through 5 exits and now advises PE portfolio companies on their sales and marketing strategies. He's got a brand new book that just dropped called the AI Handbook for Sales Professionals, where we broke down 156 different sales tools. Between the two of them, today we're covering 9 questions across career transitions, tech stack decisions, operations and process design, and strategy and finance alignment. So moving on to our first question. What happens when you've been carrying a quota your whole career and you want to cross over to the ops side without starting from scratch? This question was sent in by a senior AE at a $50 million fintech, and here's what JD had to say.
You know, this is a really common path for many sellers, thinking about moving into management or RevOps, and it's really an exciting one. But I always caution sellers that it's a very different kind of role. While being a quota-carrying AE is all about your individual achievement and celebration of you personally for winning, RevOps and leadership roles are really about empowering the team and putting the spotlight on their wins. If you're convinced that you can make that emotional transition, you will want to change some things in your new role. As a seller, you may have been celebrated for being the hero who wins the day, but in the new role, you want to be known for predictability and consistency. Your first step is really going to be about mastering the science of sales, really understanding all of the underlying data and processes that explain how your company gets to their goal every week, every month, every quarter and year. And you also need to help provide visibility to other people about how that happens. So in my first 6 months, I might spend the first 2 of them really focusing on the major metrics that matter and making sure you've got really good data hygiene to measure that stuff. These are questions like, what's your average deal size? What's your win rate? How many calls does it take to get an appointment? I start by building something I call a win creation waterfall so that maybe getting $1 million of bookings means you had to do 10 deals of $100,000 a piece. Maybe you win 1 in 3 of your opportunities. So you have to generate 30 opportunities to get to that number, and all the math all the way down to, how many calls does it take to get someone to show up for your meetings? Once you can really articulate what that formula of winning is, the next thing that I do in the next 2 months, months 2 and 3, is helping the team to really inspect those metrics and figure out where they're stuck. RevOps should absolutely get a weekly flash report out to all of the critical stakeholders that lay out all of that math to success, as well as the real metrics of how you're tracking against each of those components and what it means for your forecast. You might be able to have a lot of insight just from putting those 2 numbers side by side and saying, I know we're trying to close $1 million, but at our current win rate of 1 in 3, and we only have 20 opportunities, there's no way we're going to get there unless we have, much bigger deal sizes or better win rates or something else like that. Those kinds of insights really let you start working with sellers to manipulate the performance to get where you want to be. Start thinking in those second 2 months about running deal clinics, inspecting deals, looking for broad themes across sellers to understand, are there training gaps that people are missing? Maybe we're consistently losing because nobody is getting to the economic power or buyer. RevOps could suggest that we start doing some training on that, which will start improving the metrics. And then finally, the last 2 months of my first 6 months is where I'd start to look at the cultural things and structural things that will help these teams succeed long-term. A lot of times sales, marketing, and BDRs are pointing fingers at each other, blaming each other for not doing their jobs well. A lot of times that's because incentive plans aren't aligned properly. Do you have an incentive plan that says marketing is rewarded for getting a lot of people to come to the website, where BDRs are rewarded for setting appointments, even if those appointments don't actually convert over into sales accepted leads? And finding those structural things and suggesting ways to fix those in the architecture of your company is a great way. Congratulations on your thoughts about moving into RevOps. It's an exciting time. It's a very different kind of role, but one that I think can be rewarding.
When does it actually make sense to rip out HubSpot and move to Salesforce? And when are you just creating a problem you didn't have? This question was sent in by Director of RevOps at a $10 million healthcare SaaS. And here's what Grainne had to say.
For us, I wish I had that choice. I really like HubSpot. I really love Salesforce, but it's large, amazing, unwieldy, expensive, but still phenomenal. So we are a Salesforce house, and the decision framework for us was how integrated it is into the size of our org. Salesforce has a lot of native connectivity, has a lot of third-party connectivity, has a lot of ability to outsource some of the management of things if you want to move from in-house to outsource, but it is more expensive. It's on the more expensive side. So for me, if HubSpot does what you need, great, stick with it. Unless you have a really valid reason in terms of integrations that HubSpot doesn't have, or scale that HubSpot doesn't have, or reporting, whether native or via third-party visualization that it doesn't have, there's no reason not to stick to HubSpot. But if you're very, very embedded on Salesforce, it makes it harder to move. So for us now, it's not really integration-wise, it's size, scale, and embed-wise. We have 161 sellers across 3 continents. We are 200 million plus organization, and we have a lot of integrations with business intelligence, with native ERP systems, home-built systems, as well as third-party systems. We have a whole ecosystem built around Salesforce, so it makes it much harder for us to consider such a move. However, in the earlier days, building from HubSpot upwards, I hear a lot of amazing things. I've looked at it. It's great. So for us, it's not necessarily something that we haven't got connected. It's more size and scale wise, but the ease of Salesforce integration with third-party companies. For example, we outsource some of our maintenance is easier with Salesforce than HubSpot.
So your switching sequencing tools in the market looks completely different than it did 2 years ago. How do you pick the right platform for you in 2026? This question was sent in by a RevOps director at a $60 million data infrastructure SaaS, and here's what JD had to say.
I actually just finished writing a book about this. It's the AI Handbook for Sales Professionals, which will be available on Amazon and everywhere books are sold in April of 26. I did a lot of research on all of the applications of AI from 156 different sales tool vendors. I really believe that the differentiator of these sequencing tools is no longer just sending emails that get delivered. It's really going to be all about AI-enabled workflow. And this means a couple of different things. The first is one about autonomous agents. Does your tool offer AI SDRs or BDRs that can independently manage early stage engagements with prospects and then only hand off conversations to your real live human team when there's high levels of intent? Doing that successfully also means that there's a lot of integration that needs to happen. Does this sequencing tool ingest signals from your revenue intelligence platform or your intent platforms to be able to inform, when it should run on its own or when it should give it to a person? On the seller side, does your sequencing tool just provide a dashboard of status updates of who's opened? Or can it do some thinking about directing the seller of which leads to engage with and what messages might be best received when they do? It's a space that's really changing rapidly. And I think that this is a year where we're going to see a lot of consolidation. And soon we'll see a one-stop shop offering for intent data, sequencing, updating CRM tools, and forecasting. So rather than make a specific recommendation today that's going to get dated really quickly, I encourage you to think about all of those topics and wish you really well on your journey.
So ZoomInfo is burning a hole in your budget and you're not even using half of it. What do you replace it with? This question was sent in by a head of sales ops at a $12 million B2B SaaS startup. And here's what Grainne had to say.
I love ZoomInfo. I love what Henry has done, but it is extremely expensive. And oftentimes it's expensive because you're not using the full breadth of what it has. So we moved away from ZoomInfo for that very reason. and we have trialed different things depending on the geography. So for example, what works for us in Europe doesn't necessarily give the same results in the US. GDPR compliance in Europe versus the US is very different. So we have a number of different tech stacks, whether it's Captain Data, whether it's French-based tools that are local and we've integrated them into our workflow automation, or whether it's more well-known ones like Hunter.io. It really depends on the geography for us. It isn't one size fits all globally. ZoomInfo claims it fits globally, but we found it to be heavy and not necessarily as good in Europe as it was in the States. So one of the ones we put a bet on was Lemlist. So we integrate their warm lead gen, we integrate business intelligence into it, we integrate it with Salesforce. It's a French scale-up for outbound and has a lot of the business intelligence and lead warming and contact information embedded. But as I say, it's very good for France. It's very good for Europe. Not as good for the US from our experience so far. It's improving. So we had to plug in other more established tools from the US into our stack.
So your RevOps team is drowning and you need to offload work. How do you do that without losing control of the things that actually matter? This question was sent in by a sales ops leader at a 25 million DevOps startup. And here's what both JD and Grainne had to say.
I remember that early in my executive career, I worked for a CEO who was really maniacal about delegating work to the lowest cost resource that was capable of doing the job effectively. Now, for a long time, that meant things like cold calling got delegated to, college graduate, entry-level SDRs, and a lot of data manipulation tasks got delegated to a RevOps analyst. And I suspect at the size of the company you're in today, you probably have one person in RevOps who's finding these tasks as more than they can manage on their own. And so you're looking at, how can we grow this team? I actually think that today, the new lowest cost resource that is capable of doing a lot of tasks is often an AI tool. There are a lot of, high volume, repetitive RevOps tasks that can go there or potentially be offloaded to someone outside your company or offshore. You may even find that entire workflows can be offloaded to an AI tool or someone outside the company, like your renewals process. Maybe you have a bot that informs customers that they're up for renewal, looks at the contract, generates an invoice with the right price increases, and sends it wherever it's supposed to go. At the same time, I think there are some innately human things that are best kept to real people and probably real people that you want in your own company. These are things like trust and relationship building with your customers, strategy setting, coaching sellers on how to be better. All of these things that need high levels of perspective taking and EQ. I think you'll find those are hard to outsource and hard to find outside of your own team.
We definitely keep strategy and data governance in-house. However, in terms of support or building out processes or building out automation connect or supporting tickets, we've offshored a lot to India, and we have a third-party company who helps us with some of the process design, some of the integration, some of the tools and connectivity that RevOps need in order to be more efficient. But we keep the strategy, we keep the SIP management, we keep the data governance, not necessarily the creation of the data reports, but the data governance and the data democratization and pushing and analytics. We keep that in-house, but some of the building of processes, the rolling out of processes, the maintenance of systems, all outsourceable. For some of the easier, repetitive things, we looked at the analytics in terms of where the teams were spending their time in supporting the global sales team, and we looked at what we could build in India. And that works really well for us. It's a lower cost location, amazing talent, amazing teams, but easier than having it centralized. And for us, centralized is France in Europe. However, some of the technical things we do, we outsource to a third-party agency. Digi4Sales is a partner, a long-standing partner. They do an amazing job. They know our tech stack, they know RevOps, they know sales ops, they know sales process, they know automation.
So you've got automation running through Zapier, Make, your CRM's native tools, and things keep breaking. Where should this stuff actually live? This question was sent in by a RevOps manager at a $10 million B2B healthcare SaaS, and here's what Grainne had to say.
For us, we use CRM native automation where feasible, and we use it inside Salesforce. We have some third-party connectivity, but not necessarily a huge amount to be meaningful. We try as much as possible to use what already comes ready-baked with Salesforce or ready-baked to go in and out of Salesforce with the other tools that we purchase. We make sure that one of the checklists is, can you natively connect with Salesforce, can we actually drive the automation process without having third-party needs and without having to break everything every time a version updates?
So sales is forecasting one number, finance is looking at a completely different number, and nobody can agree on which one is the truth. This question was sent in by a VP of Sales Ops at a $25 million B2B fintech SaaS, and here's what both JD and Grainne had to say.
In some ways, I think it doesn't matter which you choose, but it's very important that you all agree about what you're specifically talking about. Salespeople tend to think about bookings, while finance often thinks a lot about billings and then recognition of revenue and sometimes even collections. And if you're not, thinking carefully about your words, you may talk past one another and create a lot of confusion and problems. So the number one thing is, whatever number you're going to use for your forecast, make sure you've really clearly defined which of these you're talking about, and everyone knows what it is. Now, in a private equity environment, ARR is really what determines your company's valuation. And you always want to have your eye on what ARR is. So I think for forecasting, a RevOps person is probably going to talk to the sales team about bookings. Ideally, that's what finance is happy to receive too. But you may have to reinterpret your bookings forecast to generate a different forecast for finance or the board on, how those bookings transition into billings and recognized revenue and, create a forecasting of that too. I also really like to have forecasting be something I talk about every week. And I love a weekly flash report that goes to all of my stakeholders, including finance and the board and all of my sales leaders, that include an up-to-date forecast number. And actually, when I do that, I talk about 3 different kinds of forecasts. I have a best case, a commit, and then the actual forecast. Now, commit is the very conservative, take it to the bank, absolute worst case number. It's the list of deals that you know are going to close for the dollar amounts you absolutely know you're going to get. Best case is sort of the best of all possible worlds. If we successfully closed everything in the pipeline that's at a realistic shot at the highest dollar amount that we've got in front of them, this is the best thing that it could be. And then kind of like that Goldilocks book, your forecast is going to be something in the middle. Not so conservative as your commit, not so optimistic as your best case. But, the not too hot, not too cold, just right. Forecast number. Once I've kind of calculated those 3, I like them to go into a single weekly flash report. It's an email that shows week by week progress against how we did in the same time last year, how we did in the same time last quarter, and what I think it's going to be. And it sort of shows all of the work to the CFO and the board to get to your forecast number.
We track both, but RevRec and invoiced is for us the key metric. So RevRec, it's absolutely key because you can book something, and bearing in mind that we do software and services, and a lot of SaaS companies actually have services or professional services built in to book something that then isn't actually going to be delivered for maybe 2, 3, 4 months. Booking is easy when it's SaaS. I've got the upfront payment. I know it's the 12-month. I know what the annual renewal is. But when you add in things like professional services, when you add in things like consumption, RevRec actually shows what's being used as opposed to what might be used. With SaaS, it's easier. With an annual booking, it's easier. But if you've anything other than annual bookings in your revenue motion, RevRec. Is data perfect? No. Is it much, much cleaner than it was before? 100%. Do I still spot some interesting insights in terms of what's in the Salesforce system versus what the reality is? Yes. I'll give you an example. As we were going through the integrations a number of years ago, we would look at the stated win value of enterprise deals. So we've got enterprise deals, we've got mid-market deals, and we've got more transactional deals. So on the enterprise side, I would regularly see, wow, we've closed a deal for 2 million. I am delighted for us, super excited. But in RevRec, I wouldn't see 2 million recognized. I might see 1 million recognized. I might see 750K recognized, 1.25 recognized. In very odd, happy circumstances, I'd see 3 million recognized. So in terms of the hygiene, we're a lot closer, between 2-3% now. In terms of hygiene, stated win, actual RevRec. I think hygiene was huge as we did the integrations, and it continues to be something that we have to control. Reports go out, outdated opportunities, but it's much less now and much more predictable. The only way AI can work is seeing that predictability. The only way you can predict what's likely to happen is modeling real accurate data on what the trends have been.
So someone changed the discount policy and suddenly the comp is wrong. The forecast is off and 3 teams are pointing fingers. Where should all this logic actually live? This question was sent in by a RevOps leader at a $50 million B2B SaaS company, and here's what Grainne had to say.
One of the things we faced, we acquired 10 companies. So the integration of those 10 companies to harmonize a comp model was extraordinarily complex. Bearing in mind, we have 20 offices, we have sales teams on 3 continents, different systems that we inherited, legacy debt that we needed to get rid of and harmonize. So we still haven't figured out where comp logic should sit. I am engaged with a company called EasyComp in early discussions because they seem to have the solutions to some of our problems. It was founded by ex-Google folks and seems to be doing really well. It's a San Francisco-based startup. They've just hired their first CRO. So that's something I'm looking at the moment because I think how we have it is basic but not optimal. In terms of pricing and discounting, we have connections between our ERP system and our Salesforce instance where we have it in the actual product. You sign up to the pricing logic is there, but it's also linked to our sales academy where our teams actually get trained on how that logic is applied and how they can have the freedom to apply X, Y, or Z discount where they need to actually engage the next level up. So we have it modeled across our systems. Do I think it's perfect? No, pricing is good, discount is good, but comp logic is our biggest pain point at the moment in terms of where that lives.
So sales is closing deals faster than your team can deliver them, and 6 months later, churn spikes. How do you get ahead of that? This question was sent in by a director of RevOps at a $15 million B2B AI SaaS, and here's what Grainne had to say.
We keep a very, very close eye on churn and downsell. So for example, a company who 4 years ago had a budget or a spend of $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million. In the age of AI doesn't mean they're spending the same amount. So we look at forecast accuracy and predictability. We look at churn and we model that into our budget. And then at a forecasting level, production and sales sign off on the forecast because a lot is recurring revenue and the next phase of that recurring revenue. So operations have a steady hand in it in terms of modeling their production capacity based on what sales are saying. So there's governance between the two parties controlled at a central level.
And that's it for episode 1 of Ask CROs. If you'd like to submit a question for our next episode or nominate a CRO to join us, please let us know. Drop it in the comments or reach out to us directly. We want this show to be built by the RevOps community for the RevOps community. Thank you for tuning in and see you on the next one.